In this video, you will learn how to make this Lightbox gallery from scratch using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You will learn how to make the gallery fully responsive so that it works well on all devices using grids. You will learn to add hover effects like this. You will also learn to add full functionality to the gallery, turning it into a Lightbox gallery. In this part of the course, you're going to also learn how to add navigation, how to add your close button, how to close out of the gallery by clicking on the blank space, and also how to add caption. And as a bonus, you're also going to learn how to navigate using your keyboard. If you don't want to go through all of this though, you can just go ahead and get the entire code from my store, imaginedigitalstore.com. You can just go and buy the product and you will have everything you need to just add this to your website, or just go through the code yourself. But if you want to learn how to do it from scratch, then please stay tuned and let's begin. Alright, let's go. So I have a tutorial folder, and that folder contains a subfolder with the images, the index.html file, the JavaScript file, and the CSS file. In my index.html file, I've already linked the CSS file as well as the JavaScript file. You know, your CSS file, it goes into your head, and your JavaScript goes before your closing body tag. The first thing that we're going to be doing is to add the images to our site. So we're going to add the images within a container. So we're going to give that container a class name of image container. And within that container, we're going to add, let's do 6. So we added 6 images within the container, and now we're going to go ahead and add the image sources. So we're going to go into the images folder and we're going to add each of the sources. Alright, so we've added all the images. So once you hit save, you should see the images load up into your preview. So we're doing the live preview from VS Code. And so you can see that we have all the images loaded up here. Now let's go over to the styles.css and let's start setting up the file. So let's do a background color for the body. We're going to do background color and we're going to set it to RGB, and I'm going to use 2, 4, and 11. Then I want to create a container class. We need to center all the images, and this is going to be useful for responsiveness later. So I'm going to call the class .container. Within it, I'm going to do a max width of 1536 pixels. Then a margin left of auto, a margin right of auto, padding left of 0.5 rem, and a padding right also of 0.5 rem. Now, to see this container in action, I need to add it to the class over here. So I'm going to go ahead and add container to this. And when I hit save, you can see that the images have moved into the center. Now, it don't look like it's centered, and that's because we are not seeing the entire width of the container. So let me also do a background color on this container just so you can see. So let's do background color of pink. Right, so now you're seeing that the container itself is centered, but the images within the container, they're not being affected. Now it's time for us to create the responsive grid. So we're going to use the class that we added to the container. So this, you can just copy it and then you can add it. So we're going to set the display to grid. We're going to also give it a grid gap of about 0.7 rem. When I save this, you can see that nothing is happening here. But then let's go ahead and add the magic to this. Let's also do the grid template columns, and we're going to do repeat because we want the columns to be created as you add images into the grid. So it's going to repeat and it's going to auto fit, and we're going to do based on a min max, and the minimum is let's do 400 pixel 1 FR. Let me set this to wrap. Right, so what this line of code means is that we are going to be creating columns, which is repeating, and we're going to be auto-fitting those columns based on the minimum and the maximum values. The minimum here being 400 pixels and the maximum being 1 FR. So let me go ahead and save this, and you can see that the images have now spanned and started to be added to columns. But you can see that the images are actually going outside of the column width. And that's because the images have a fixed width right now. To fix that, we need to give the actual images a width of 100%. So the images are within the image container class. So to access that class, we're going to do that image container image. Now we can set the width to 100%, and we can set the height to auto. When you hit save, now look at that. Your images have now been resized to fit the width of the column. And to show you how this works, let's say I change the minimum to 700 pixels. Now you can see that the images have rearranged themselves and are fitting the column based on the minimum size. To show you how this works in practice, let me go ahead and uncomment out the background color. And if I save it, you can see that all the images are spreading out to fit the entire width of the container. And if I resize all the way down to mobile, you can see this more clearly. So right now, there's only enough space in the container to fit one image within a row based on the minimum size of 400 pixels. And as I increase the size of the container, the images will start to spread out. So now we can fit two images side by side of a minimum width of 400 pixels. And this will keep happening, and this line of code will keep repeating to create more columns based on the space that is available to fit any number of images of this minimum size. Make sense? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and uncomment this and save it. We're going to be making some changes to this as well, so let's keep going. Now we need to add some margin to the container to move it a little bit from the top and also not make the container be so big. So let's go ahead and do margin top of 4 rem, margin bottom of 2 rem, a margin left and a margin right of 10 rem, and save. So now the container is moved a little bit from the top of the screen. We also have moved it over a little bit so that the images and the container aren't spreading out too much for this viewport, because on bigger screens, I don't want the gallery to spread all the way out. This is what we have so far, so we need to wrap up the responsiveness. I want to ensure that when it reaches a certain viewport size, the container starts to fill out the entirety of the screen and starts to look better. But on big screens, it stays very much in the center like this and don't expand throughout the entire page. So remember this container class that we added. This is for all the sizes that are above 1280 pixels. So what I'm going to do so that we can visually see each of the different viewport sizes is I'm going to add a border to it. So instead of a background, I'm going to do a border. So border of, let's do 2 pixel, solid white. So now you can see the border here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the media queries that I'll need for this. So the first media query that I'm going to add is one for a max width of 1280 pixel. So at media, open, max width, and you want to set that to 1280 pixels. Within the media query, I want to select the container. So this is the container class, and I'm going to add it to this media query here. All I want from this is the max width and the border, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these, and I'm going to set the max width, of this to 1024. And I'm going to change the color of the border to, let's do red. Now when I save this, if I resize, you can see that when it comes down to the viewport size that I want to change, which is the 1280 pixel max, the border changes as well. So I know exactly what I'm working on. For this viewport size, I want the images to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to copy my image container class. I'm going to paste it below the container class within my 1280 pixel viewport size. And by the way, this is desktop first development. So we're working our way from the largest screen all the way down to the smallest. So all I want from this here is the margin left and margin right. So I'm going to delete the top and the bottom. I'm not going to be changing display grid or the grid gap, so I can delete those as well. The only thing I want to change here is the margin left. I'm changing that to 5 rem, and I'm changing the margin right to 5 rem as well. Now when I hit save, you can see that the images got bigger. Let me comment these out and save. You see how small that is? So when I uncomment again and save, it's a little bit bigger. So coming from the bigger screens, you can see the changes are being made to the viewport size, right? Perfect. Now, when it comes down to smaller screens, and let me decrease this, you can see now we have a single image. So I want to adjust the viewport size of 1024. So now I need to address this viewport size. So I need to add a new media query. I'm going to add the media query that is below this one. So it's going to be at media. And we're doing a max width of 1024. So the next media query below this one is going to have the max width of the container that is within it. So now this has a max width of 1024. And let's copy our container class and place it in here. And now its max width will become 768. And I'm going to change the border color to Let's do a green. Oh, I made an error. It's supposed to be 1024 pixels. Now when I save it, you can see here the color changes as well. So now I know I'm working within this viewport size. So everything up to 1024 pixels. Now let me go ahead and bring down this image class within this viewport size. And for this, I want to change two things. The first, I want the margin left to be auto. And I want the margin right to also be auto. Now you see it's stretching out a bit. And I want to change the minimum width of the images to 300 pixels. This will allow two images to sit side by side each other within this viewport size. Now that we have pretty much removed the margin from the left and the right, and we're doing auto margin, everything below 1024 is going to remain within the center of the viewport. So when I resize down to mobile, you can see that our images are sticking within that center. So if I comment this out like this, what did I do? Save. Yeah, if I take out the margin left auto and the margin right auto, this is what we have. So let me just remove those comments and save again. And you can see we're getting exactly what we want. So resizing, we're looking really good. And this is exactly how you want your gallery to behave. So for every viewport size, we have decided what the minimum size should be and whether or not we should have margins on the left and the right to control the size of the gallery. Now we need to add an hover effect over the images so that when we mouse over them, they actually grow a little bit in size. So to do that, we're going to go back to the CSS. We're going to do the image container. So let's go image container image. So we want a hover on the image. And we're going to say transform scale. And it's going to go by 1.03. So if I save that, now you see when I hover over the image, it is expanding just a bit, but it is doing it in such a rigid way. We need to smooth this out, so we need to add a transition to it. So in the image container image class, we're going to add a transition. So transition, let's add it on the transform property, and we want this to happen over 3 seconds, 0.3 seconds, and we want it to ease. So now when I hover over it like this, you are seeing it ease instead of just being so rigid. All right, so now it's time to add some functionality to this, right? So we want to add a lightbox where if you click on an image, it will open up and the background will get dark and that image will be featured. So the first thing we're going to do is to make sure that the mouse cursor turns into a pointer whenever we hover over an image. So let's go into the image container image class here that we have, and we're going to add cursor pointer. Save, and now when I hover over the image, you can see that the pointer, that the cursor changes to a pointer, and that's good. The next thing that we need to do is to set up the Lightbox container. So go back to your HTML, and I'm going to create a container, a div with a class of Lightbox. And I'm also going to give it an ID of Lightbox. Now that we have that, I'm going to copy the class name, go over to our styles, and right before the media queries, I'm going to put a dot, paste our class, and then this will be where we'll make the style changes to the Lightbox. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to give it a background color, and this background color is going to be RGBA. 0, 0, 0, and 0.9. Then we want to, let's do a width of 100% and a height of 100%. Perfect. Next, we want to make sure that this background comes on top of all the images. So let's also give it a Z index of 9999. So that's like the highest. So we'll ensure that it comes above everything. Next, we want to do, let's give it a position. So let's do position fixed. And now this will add the background. I don't know if you can see it, but it's up top here. And because it's like that, I want to go ahead and do a top of 0 and left of 0. So there we go. The position fixed will pull this container out of the normal flow of the HTML and CSS, and then we use top, bottom, left, right to position it where we want based on the container, the parent container. And in this case, the parent container is the body. So when I say that I want it to be at the top 0, it's up here, and left 0 is all the way up here. The width and the height that we put for 100% make sure that this fills up the entire screen, right? So now that we have the Lightbox background set up, this will not be active just every time you load the page. We actually want to hide this so that it only comes up when we click on an image. So at the top, we're going to give this a display of none. Right, so when we click on an image, we want that to come up. So for now, it's just going to display as none. All right, now that we have all that set up, it's time for the functionality. And to do this, we'll be writing JavaScript. So I'll try to explain everything as I go along, and I'll break it up in parts so that you can follow along as well. The first thing that we need to do is we need to create 2 constant variables. So the first constant variable is going to be Lightbox, and it's going to be document.getElementById, and that ID is Lightbox. This ID is coming from over here where we added this ID to the container. So this line of code is pretty much just looking through the document and finding the element that has an ID of Lightbox. And all of that will be stored in this variable here. Next, we need a variable to hold all the images in the gallery. So let's do constant gallery items. And now we're going to do document.querySelectorAll, and we want to select all the images. To do that, if you come back to your CSS, you'll see that this class here, the image class, which is in the image container class, gives you access to all the images. So you just need to copy this class and paste it in here. Let me do a word wrap on this so that it stays in one spot. All right, so now we have the 2 variables, one for the Lightbox container and one that holds all the images. Since we're storing all the images, it means that this variable here is now an array. So if you don't know what an array is, you can just look it up quickly to find out. We won't get too deep into that here. So now it's time to loop through our array. So we want to ensure that no matter what image is clicked in the gallery, it still works. So we want to select each of them. To do that, we're going to say gallery items dot for each. This will loop through each of the items, each of the images. We're going to open. Then we're going to pass in the two parameters, which is image and index. This image here just stores the current element. This index here just stores the current position. And you know, in an array, the position starts from 0. So once you have that, we're going to do an arrow function, and we're going to open the function like this. And don't forget your semicolon, right? Okay, so now we're looping through the array to select each image. Once we select an image, what we need to do is we need to add an event listener to that image, which listens out for a click. So let's do that now. So we're going to say gallery items, and we're going to access the array, not like that. We're going to access the array like this, and what we're passing to gallery items is the index. So remember, this index here stores the position in the array. So for each loop, we want the current position. So now that we have the current position, you can say dot add event listener, and the event that we're listening for here is a click. And then we want to add, comma out, and then we want to add an anonymous function here. So this is a function that we'll define within our flow. So let's open our curly braces, and for now, just to make sure it works, we're just going to add an alert to this. So I'm going to say alert, open braces, and hello. So before we get all complicated in the code, we just want to make sure that it works. And if it doesn't work, it's easier to fix now than later. So we add our semicolon and make sure we have another one here to close out, and then you hit save. So now when you go over to your gallery and you click, look at that. So I can click on each of these images, and you can see that it is running this alert. So to recap, we created two variables, Lightbox, which contains the Lightbox container, gallery items, which is an array that has all the images within the container. Then we're using the for each method to loop through the array to select each image. And once we select an image, we're adding an event listener to that image, and the event we're listening for is a click. Once we hear the click in JavaScript terms, we are going to go ahead and run this anonymous function, which says hello. Awesome. I hope you're following so far. Now that we know that the function is working and we can click on any image and get this part of the code to run, it's time for us to do what we really need to do, which is open the Lightbox when we click any of the images. So if you remember back in our CSS, let me scroll down here, our Lightbox class has all the features it needs already. And then we just set the display to none because we don't want it to show by default. So in order to get this to show, we would need to change the display value to flex. And now you can see that it's showing. But we don't want to do this in the CSS. We need to do this in JavaScript. And so the JavaScript that we add into here needs to be able to change the value of that display. So the first thing we need to do is to create the function. We're going to call the function open Lightbox. Right? Add our parentheses and then our curly braces. Within this function, we need to change the display from none to flex. So remember, in this Lightbox variable, we are storing the Lightbox class. So we can say Lightbox dot style. So we're accessing the styles of Lightbox now, and the style that we want to access is display, and we want to change it to flex. Right, so this function accesses the styles for Lightbox, and we're going to change the display to flex. When do we want it to change to flex? Whenever we click on the box. So I'm going to remove this alert, and I'm also going to remove this function here. So all we're left with right now is the click event. So when the click happens, I want it to run this function. So all I'm going to add here is my open and close parentheses, since this function doesn't take any parameters, right? And we're using an arrow function here, and I'm going to type the name of the function, which is open Lightbox. Then I close my parentheses like this, and I can remove these curly braces. So now this is what we have. So whenever you click on any of the images, it's going to run the open Lightbox function. So let me save this and click on an image, and there you go. So if I refresh and click on any other image, you'll see that it is showing up. Now, the next thing we need to do is to make sure that whichever image that we click on, so if I click on this image, it needs to open up in this space here. So let's go straight into that part of it. Now it's time to add the image to the Lightbox. So in the HTML, we're going to add our image. So we're adding it within the Lightbox container. So just add the image element like that. Then we're going to add a class to this. It's going to have a class name of Lightbox __ image. And we also need to give it an ID of Lightbox img. Save that, then go to your JavaScript. Now we want to add the image to a variable, so let's do constant Lightbox __ image, and this is going to equal to document.getElementById, and the ID that we used a while ago, it was called Lightbox img. Now that we have the Lightbox image stored in a variable, we can access it. And to access that image, we're going to go within the Lightbox. So remember that this function here, it opens up the Lightbox and, puts the overlay. So now we need to make sure that the image also comes here. The first thing that we're going to do though is we need to hold the current image. So we're going to create a variable here. So it's called constant image is equal to gallery items. And we want to pass it the current position. So this current position here is going to be the index that you get while you're looping through this array here. Once we have that, we can say Lightbox __ image dot source is equal to image dot source. So this line of code here is taking the Lightbox image, which is this image here, its source file, and it's going to replace it with the image source file from the gallery. So it's going to take the current image that is at this position, take its source and add it to this. And then that source will show up in here. Now what we need to do is to go inside our loop, and we need to actually pass the index variable into the open Lightbox function because we're using it here. and this function right now does not know what this variable is. So we need to add index here, so it's taken in one parameter, and then when we go down to our for loop, we also need to be passing index into here. So whichever position we're currently on, it gets passed into the function when it is called, and then it gets used here to provide us with the right image. So I'm going to save this, and if I click here, there we have the image. So that's working. Now the function is good, but we need to style this, and all styling is done in your CSS. So the first issue is that the image is way too big, so I need this to be a lot smaller. So I'm going to go into the Lightbox. So we're still addressing this within the Lightbox here. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to do the Lightbox image. So let's do dot Lightbox image, and I want the image to have, let's do a max width of about 80%. No, let's do 90. A max width of 90% and a max height of about 80%. That should keep it looking good. And let's also give it a border radius of about 10 pixels. So now you can see the image has reduced in size. We have a little radius going on for the borders, and now we need this to center. So in order to center this, we want it to be centered in the Lightbox. So I'm going to do justify content center and align items center. Now we have the image in the center of the gallery. So perfect. We have made some progress. Nice. All right. I hope you got to this point and you don't really have any issues. If you do, you can just go back and try to figure out exactly what went wrong. Can you guess what the next part of this is going to be? No? It's closing, because we can't keep refreshing the page. So whenever we click on an image and it opens up like this, we need to do two things. One, we need to click on a close button somewhere up here. And two, we need to be able to click outside of the image to also close it. So you can close by clicking the button, or you can close by clicking outside of the image. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let us start by adding the X, the close button icon. So to do this, back in the index.html within the Lightbox container, we're going to add a span, and in the middle of this span, we're going to add the entity code for the X, and that entity code is and times colon, right? Then you want to add a class to this. This class is going to be called close, and I also want to add an ID to this, and I'm going to call it close btn. Save that. Now we need to go over to our CSS and style this. So dot close open, and the first thing I'm going to do is give this a color of white. I don't know if you can see it, but if you look good, you will see it all the way down here. It's this little X. So let's make that a bit bigger by giving it a font size of 40 pixel. Now it's bigger, but we need this to be at the top right hand side of the screen. So what we need to do is, let's change its position to absolute, In this way, we can decide where exactly we want it to go. So now that it has a position of absolute, it has been pulled outside of the natural flow, and it is now stacked on top of the image. As you can see here, it's all the way in the center. So now we need to position it using the top, right, left, down property. So from the top, I want it to come down at about 20 pixels. There it is. And then from the right, I want it to come over by 30 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Perfect. Now, the last thing we need to do is when we hover over this, I want it to change to a click. The cursor, it needs to change to a pointer. So let's do cursor and change that to pointer. Save. Now when we hover over it, it changed to the pointer. And let's also make this a little bit bolder. So let's do font weight and bold. Perfect. But right now it doesn't do anything. So remember, HTML is just adding the elements, CSS is styling, and JavaScript is where the functionality comes in. So let's add the JavaScript needed to give some function to this button. Let's do close Lightbox Gallery. So that's just a comment. And we're going to create the close Lightbox function. So to do this, let's do function close Lightbox. And in here, what we want to do is we want to take the Lightbox display and switch it to none. So remember, it was none first, then we turned it on by changing it to flex. Now we need to just change this back to none. So lightbox.style.display is equal to none. Now that we have this function, we need to apply it somewhere because it's still not doing anything, right? So what we need this function to do is to run whenever we click the X. So we need to add an event listener to this button here. To do this, we need to create another variable. So let's do constant close button is equal to document.getElementById. And what was the ID that we were using? The ID is close btn. So now this variable has the element button. Now we can come all the way down here and say close btn. Let's add an event listener to it. And the event that we're listening for is a click. And when that click happens, we want to run the function. Get out of the way, what is that? We want to run the function close Lightbox. So now when I open this and I click the X, you can see that it's working. Awesome. All right, so we've made some progress there. Now the next part of this is to make sure that it closes whenever we click outside of the image. For that, we need to stay in JavaScript, and we're going to need to add another function that does this. So let's go below this here. But always add comments, especially in your JavaScript if you're new. So this is going to be close Lightbox when you click X. And then I'm going to do another one called close Lightbox when you click outside of the image. Now, um, the the thing that we want to add the event to is the lightbox itself. So I'm clicking the lightbox right now. So what we're going to do is do lightbox dot add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is a click in the lightbox, which is represented by this, right? When we click the lightbox, we want to capture what that event is. So this E is what we use in JavaScript to record the event. So whenever that click happens, this E captures all the details about the click, where it happened, what type of click it was, etc. So now we're going to create an arrow function, and then within this function, never forget your semicolon. Within this function here, I like to give it some space. I can now type what I want to happen when I click the lightbox. So let's do let's do the logic first. So if I click the image, I don't want it to close. But if I click outside of the image, that's when the function should run. So the thing that we need to check for is whether the event is clicking the lightbox or it's clicking the image. And so we captured the event here. So now we can check to see if it's clicked on the lightbox or it's clicked on anything else. So let's do if open bracket e.target. So we're trying to find out if the target is equal to the lightbox, and if it is, we want to close lightbox. So we run the function. So we don't need an else right here, so we're just checking if the target of the event is equal to the lightbox, then run the function. If it's not equal to the lightbox, then you don't need to do anything. So I'm going to save this, and then when I click here, if I click outside, it closes. If I click the image, nothing happens. If I click outside, it closes. If I click the X, it closes. Yay! All right, so we have made a good amount of progress, and you can stop here if you want, because that's really good enough and it's already responsive. But we're going to take it a step further. We're going to be adding some quality of life to this. 3 things are very important. 1, being able to scroll through the gallery from within the lightbox. 2, being able to add captions so we can know exactly what this is that we're looking at. And 3, being able to use the keyboard and like your escape key to close and scroll through the lightbox. So we're going to do those things, so stay tuned. First up, let's add the next button and the previous button. All right, so let's go right into the lightbox container, and we want to add a button. And in this button, we're going to add the entity code for the arrows, the next and the previous arrows. So the entity code for the previous one is ampersand pound 10094 semicolon, right? And then to this, we also want to add 2 classes. So let's do nav button. So nav __ button and previous. Let's also add an ID, so we can use this in our JavaScript of previous btn. We're going to do the same thing for the next button. So add a button, and we want to add the code. So it's going to be ampersand pound 10094. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4 add your semicolon. Then we're going to do a class of, we do want to have the same nav btn so we can start both of them, but then we're also going to have the class next, and we're going to also have an ID of next btn. Let's save that. So now let us go ahead and style this. So if I click on this, you're going to see the two buttons right here. Oh, both of them are facing the same way. This one needs to be 9.5. So let me save that and open it back. All right, so here we go. Let us style them. So we're going to go below this class here, and we're going to do, what class was it again? It was nav underscore btn. So let's do nav underscore btn. We want to give this a color of white. We want the position to be absolute. Then we want to make sure that it's at the center of the page, so we're going to do a top of 50%. Great. Let's do a font size of 40 pixels. That makes them larger. And I want to have a border of none, background color of RGBA, and this is going to be 0.0 point. I'm going to change this to 0.5. Right, so now you can see the button looking like that. Let's also add some padding. The padding top and bottom 10 pixels, left and right 15 pixels. And we also want, when we hover over it, the cursor turns to a pointer. So let's add that as well. And let's also set user selection none. And we also want to have a transform on this. So we're going to do a translate y of -50%. All right, that's looking good. Now we need to get these from the center. So that is the reason why we added a different class to each of these. So we're going to do the settings for previous and the settings for next. So come below this class here, and then you want to make the, which one is this? Previous. So previous should be on your left. So I want it to go from the left of about 30 pixels. Right. And then you want to do the same for the other button. So this is next. And I want it to go from the right, also of 30 pixels. So now we have our button looking like this. Great. Now let's add some functionality to the buttons. So we're back into our JavaScript. We need to create two variables for each of the buttons. So we're going to call this, let's first do previous button, so previous btn. And this is going to be equal to document.getElementById. And the ID that we used was previous btn. Let me just make sure. Right, previous and next btn. Let's also do the same for the next button. So next btn is equal to document.getElementById, and the ID is next btn. Now for this functionality, we're also going to need a variable to hold the current index. So this variable needs to change, so it can't be a constant like the ones that we have above this. So we're going to use the let keyword. So let current index, and we're going to assign it a value of 0. So that is the first position within the array. Now, when we open the Lightbox, we need to be able to track where we are within the array. And remember that this index keyword here is what is tracking the position from this loop here. So when we get this position, we also want to be able to keep it within our variable. So here I'm going to assign it to current index. I'm going to say current index is equal to index. And in this way, I can use current index later in another function. All right, so let's go a bit down here. And I'm going to write the function for showing the previous image first. So let's do showing previous image. The function that we're going to create, I can call it show previous, show prev, that works. So that's our function. Now, if you think about the previous image, then you want to try to figure out what position the previous image is in. For example, if I'm in position 3 right now, and I want to go to the previous position, you would say that you just subtract 1 from this, and that would be equal to 2. So if I'm at position 3, the previous position would be position 2, right? But what if you are at position 0 and you subtract 1? This will mean, where's the 1? This will mean that now the value of current index would be -1, and there is no position in an array called -1. It's all positive. It goes from 0 right up to whatever length the array is. So that's the issue that we want to solve here right now. To do that, you want to add the entire length of the array to this, and then you want to use modulo to wrap everything around. So modulo will just give you the remainder of the current number divided by the length of the array. Let me show you how that works. So let's say I'm at position 3 and I want to go to the previous position. So I'm going to subtract 1 from this so I can step backwards, and then I'm going to add the length of the entire array, and in this case the length is 6, right? So that's the first part of the formula. So 3 minus 1 is 2 plus 6 is 8. Then I'm going to do modulo the length of the array, which is 6. So 8 modulo 6 is 2. So we're at position 3, and we want to get to the previous position, which is 2. And now this formula gives us that 2. If you're at position 0, and you want to get to the previous image, that previous image would actually be the last image, which is image number 6 or 5, whichever length of the array that you have. So 0 minus 1 is -1, plus 6 is 5, and then 5 modulo 6 is 5, and that gets you to the end of the array. So this formula is what we need this function to do, right? So the way we do that is, remember we had the current index stored, so this is the current position. So come down here, we're going to say current index is going to be equal to, and let's write the first part of that function. It's the current index -1. Then I want to add the length of the array, and the length of the array is, let me scroll back up here. So this gallery items variable contains the length of the array. It has in all the images. So that is going to work out to be gallery items dot length. This is going to give me the length of the array, and I can add it to this. And then I can do modulo gallery items dot length. And that will give me the next position, just like how I showed you. And once I get the next position, then I need to move to it. So this will make current index be 2, because remember, we're assuming that I'm at position 3. So if I'm at position 3 and I run this formula here, current index, which is this, is going to be equal to 2. So now I need to show the image that is at 2. So I just need to pass that number all the way into the open lightbox function, because remember, it uses the index to show the image. So down here I can just say open lightbox and pass it the current index and save. Let's also go ahead and do the same thing for the next image. So this is going to be show the next image. I want to create the function function show next. And for this, we're going to set current index to be equal to current index plus 1. And then this we can do modulo gallery items dot length. Then we can add the current index when we call the function open lightbox. So if you do the math on this, if I'm at position 4, 4 plus 1 is 5, 5 modulo 6 is 5. If I'm at position 6, 6 plus 1 is, not position 6, it'd be position 5, sorry. 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 modulo 6 is 0, and we're back to the front of the array. So that works out. So now we have the formulas for both previous and next. Now it's time to set up the event listeners. Alright, so we're going to call these navigation buttons. And the first one we're going to set up is the previous. So remember that we're storing the previous button within this variable, and also the next button. So that's what we want to add the event listener to. So previous btn dot add event listener, and we're listening for a click. I hate when this comes up. We are listening for a click, and then when that click happens, we want to record the event. Why does this keep coming up? Anyway, so we're recording the event, and then we're going to call a function. Now that we have our function, I want the event to call a method called stop propagation. What this method does is it prevents the click on the previous button or the next button to also trigger and close the entire lightbox. So by adding this method on the event, it ensures that it only affects the button and not the entire lightbox itself. So once we click on the previous button, we want to run the function show previous. And we want to do the same thing as well for the next button. So next btn dot add event listener, we're listening for a click. when the click happens, we want to record the event, and we want to call an anonymous function here, arrow function. We still want to make sure that we add the stop propagation method. And then finally, we want to run show next. And that should do it. Let's go ahead and test this out. So if I click on, now you can see I'm able to scroll through my gallery. So that is working well. And if I click on it, it doesn't accidentally close. See? So that's what stop propagation does. All right, so the final thing we need to do is to use the keyboard to control this, to like scroll through. All right, let's move into that now. All right, so let's do keyboard nav. And now the important thing for being able to use the keyboard is being able to get the details from the event that happens. Because remember, when you add event listeners, it's listening out for all the events. So clicks, keyboard presses, all of that. So you just need to tell it what to listen out for. So up to now, we've been telling it to listen out for clicks. So we're going to tell it to listen out for keyboard presses now. And what exactly are we telling? The entire document. So what we need to do is do document.addEventListener. And the event that we're listening for in this case is called keydown. So we want to know which key is being pressed to trigger the event. So to do that, we collect the event itself, and then we're going to call an arrow function on this, add your semicolon here. And within this now, first thing we need to do is to ensure that this only happens whenever the lightbox is open. So we're going to check to see if it is open. So we're going to say if lightbox So if lightbox.style.display is equal to flex, then do everything within the parentheses. So if lightbox.style.display is equal to flex, do everything within the curly braces. What this is checking for is if the lightbox is open. Remember, the lightbox is set to display none by default, or you could have just closed the lightbox for whatever reason. And if I press the keys at this moment, I don't want anything to be happening. The keys on the keyboard should only function if I have the lightbox open like this. So if the lightbox is open, then I can go ahead and do what I want. So let's use a series of if statements to figure out which keys are being pressed. So I'm going to say if e.key, remember E is the event, if the key that was pressed is equal to arrow left, and that's the left arrow key, then I want it to show the previous. So it's going to run this function. Else if, and we're going to do the key that was pressed is arrow right, then I want to show next. And then finally, if the key that was pressed is the escape key, because we also want to use the escape key to close the lightbox, then let's do close lightbox. Is that how I spelled that function? Let me just check. Right, yeah. Okay, so there we go. Now we are listening out for these presses on the keyboard, and if they happen while the lightbox is open, then these will run. So let's test it out. So the lightbox is open now, and if I press the right arrow key, it runs the function show next, and if I press the left arrow key, it runs the function show previous, and if I press escape, it closes the lightbox. And we are done. We have one final thing to do, and it is to add the caption to this image. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so finally we want to end with adding the caption to the images. So right below the Lightbox image right here, I want to add the caption. So I'm going to have a div with a class of caption. So just caption like this. And I'm also going to make sure that it have an ID of Lightbox caption. So ID Lightbox __ caption. In order for this to work, we're actually going to use the alt information for the images to display the captions. So let me just add some alt text to this. Let's do dark and moody. I'm just adding some random stuff. Eggs, fluffy pancakes, skewers, I don't know. And this is a healthy salad, and pizza, pineapple pizza. Alright, so we've added some alt text to our images, and that is what we'll be using to show the caption. So let's go ahead and make sure that the caption itself is showing up. First, we need to give it some styles, but it's hard to style it if I'm not seeing it here. So maybe we need to show it first. Let me go ahead and do this in the JavaScript. So the first thing that we need to do is to store the caption information. So I'm going to do, what was the class I gave it? Lightbox caption. So constant Lightbox caption is going to equal to document dot get element by ID, and the ID is, oh sorry, I didn't copy it. What was the ID? This one here. Actually, let me change the ID to this. Right. Okay. So constant Lightbox caption is equal to document dot get element by ID. Lightbox caption. Perfect. Now we need to make sure that the Lightbox text content. Now we need to add the alt information into the Lightbox text content area. So below here, I'm going to say Lightbox caption dot text content, which is the content within the div, should be equal to, and remember we're using the alt information from the image, so image dot alt, not last child, stop that, dot alt. Sometimes VS Code can do the most. All right, perfect. So now let's go ahead and see if we can get it to show up. So we're all the way back into our CSS, and let's add the class. It was .caption. Sorry. And we want to give it a color of white. There it is to the right. So we need to position it below our image here. So let's give this a position of absolute. That pulls it to the center, and we want to do push it down from the top to, let's try 90% and see how that looks. Okay, perfect. 90% works, and we want to give it a font size of 2 rem, maybe 1.5. Yeah, 1.5 works. And we also want to do a text align off center. And there we go. So now we have the caption for each of the images showing up based on whatever we have in the alt text part of the image tag. And that is it. You now have your beautiful Lightbox gallery. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something today, and I do hope that your Lightbox gallery is working. It looks really good, and you can apply this in so many different ways. So thank you so much for watching. Do leave comments down below to let me know if the video was okay and if there's anything you did not understand. And remember, if you don't want to go through all of this, you can just go ahead and just get the full code for the gallery from my digital store, imaginedigitalstore.com. So the choice is up to you, and thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.